Okay, so I wanted to make this video as a kind of follow-on video from the last one I did. In the last one, I was talking about basically self-inquiry, an inquiry into the identity as it's suggested in thought, or the identification mechanism as it appears in thought. I was also talking to people in the comments, and something came up. I don't know if this was mentioned in the comment at all, or if I just went on a rant and started talking about it. I can't remember. But it's basically to point out that anyone who's watching these videos and this happens frequently, people tell me frequently that they feel a resonance in what I'm talking about. Maybe they feel like a transmission, let's say, or clarity, or have a moment of clarity or recognition. And they'll think, in watching these videos and listening to me pointing to this, and they'll feel a moment of clarity, a moment of recognition. There's something there, and it'll maybe be framed by the mind, and that really makes sense, or I've never heard that put that way before, or something clicks, and it might seem like what it is that clicks is the way I'm talking, or what I'm talking about. And then there is a tendency, by association, with David here talking about awakening or talking about inquiry. Pardon me. By association, that associated clarity then gets anchored some way into these videos, or this language. There's an association with that, let's say, transmission or resonance there, that the mind can only frame it in David said something, it made sense, and then that, in a causal way, caused this moment of clarity. And that's I can tell you honestly that that's not what happens. That's not what happened. So the tendency will be then to go and watch other videos that I've put on this channel, and you might watch another one and the same thing will happen, but it seems different from the first moment of clarity, because the language, because the topic that I'm talking about in the next video is a different topic, or I'm using different language, but it's the same recognition. And what's not happening is David giving you information in language, you understand it, and what it really does seem like that, you understand it, and then that leads to this moment of clarity that you have as an individual. But that's not happening. I'm not actually giving you, the viewer, anything. That recognition comes from within yourself. That resonance, that feeling, that intuition, that recognition is awakeness, let's say, in you, but the awakeness is what you are. Awakeness recognizing itself. So the more videos of mine that that you watch, it's not going to lead to an accumulation of knowledge, it leads to greater insight. I know it seems like that, but that's not the case. The ideal scenario is you watch one of these videos and then that resonance is there, that recognition clarifies in the moment, through and behind the language, through and behind the character David and the character whoever you are that's watching. And once that's recognised, once that's tasted, the ideal scenario is you just stop watching videos altogether and you just deepen that in your own experience. Explore that in your own immediate experience now, and that could be all that's needed. I just think it's important to point that out. Like I mentioned in one comment, what tends to happen is people won't get in touch with me through whatever platform. I'll engage with them for a bit. They'll have an awakening. It'll deepen, and then they vanish. I don't hear from them again, because they don't need David to point anymore. They don't need. It's clear that was never happening. They don't need to listen to me talking about this, because that becomes uninteresting compared to the deeply fascinating nature of your own experience. So the perfect situation is that everyone who watches these videos, everyone who's subscribed to this channel will just unsubscribe and then fuck off. And then so I'm not doing this channel to unless it's interesting and you know there are some deeper stages of inquiry that you might come back to. It might not be me, it might be someone else, but I'm not doing this channel for any agenda. I'm not doing this to promote a message or amass subscribers. I mean, I've already got 300 and something subscribers. I don't even know who any of most of these people are, but that's good. But I think it's just a good idea to point that out sometimes. This is all about recognising what I'm pointing to in your own experience, and you don't need me as a crutch to talk you through it all the time. Maybe it helps, initially. It helps initially, for sure. But after that recognition has come through an experience, let's say, after that has clarified to an extent, you don't need it anymore. You don't need it. It's self-perpetuates itself after a certain point, and you can overcomplicate things by consuming too much content about this topic. I'm not saying that to put anyone off, I'm just saying it to point out something that's important. What was my original reason for this video? I think it was a continuation, self-inquiry. So I wanted to point out that what I talk about in the last video, I think it was the last one anyway, maybe it wasn't, doesn't matter. So I talked about noticing and releasing thought, and then this is a limited language, right? I talked about noticing that the self was merely suggested in the context, best way I can put it just now, the context of the thought. But, right, here's the thing. That's not recognised by you from a point of view, from a position, because that's a thought, right? It's not recognised by you. There's no you that sees not you and then decides it's not a thing anymore. And it's not like that. So I'm going to try and describe something very, very, very hard to put into words. So I encourage anyone to feel what I'm talking about in an intuitive way. And the descriptions might help to some degree, but I'm not talking to you as a character. I'm not talking to you so that you can understand what I'm saying from a position and then notice something that I'm describing from that position, right? That sounds mental, I know. I'll describe to you how can I frame this, right? So if I describe this to you as my own experience, I'm going to be describing that from my apparent position of experience. That might not be effective. let's just keep talking and see what happens. So I mentioned the noticing of thoughts. So it might go like this. So you engage in some inquiry. You bring your attention into the sense of being, direct experience, this immediate sense of aware aliveness. And then you direct, let's say you direct your attention. It seems like that in the beginning. You direct your attention to, let's say, the space of thought, and you watch for the next thought. This is how it all starts. You watch for the next thought. So in that, I say you watch for the next thought. There is a watching. There is an awareness. It might start off framed as me watching for thought, but when we relax into that, in that space between thoughts, let's say when the mind is calm for whatever period of time, there is an awareness. There is a presence. What we're doing is we are in and as that aware presence, which isn't a position. Can't tell you what it is. It's just here. It's ongoing. Infinitely without time. It's not a position of me. There's a noticing of thoughts appearing in and as this space of awareness, of consciousness. A thought comes up, right? Quite overt, you notice. No, not I am thinking. That thought is noticed. There is a degree of aware recognition that is a thought. As soon as that's recognised, even in the process of doing that, as that's recognised, I say it almost seems like attention is directed towards it. Not from a position, but there's attention, there's awareness there. It dissolves back into whatever this aware space is, right? This keeps happening with these overt thoughts. They come up talking about a narrative. Could be talking about, initially it's talking about something in past and future, right? Eventually it talks about what you're doing now. I'm doing this. I'm noticing a thought. No, that's a thought. Okay, drop that. What else is present? What else is here? That's a thought. Let it go. Dissolves. And then in doing that, things get quieter. The thought, the mind activity calms down to an extent. Here. The mind activity calms down to an extent, right? This is the part where, if you're fully identified with a thought, it's not going to appear as a thought. Let's say you aren't aware that it's a thought. It seems like reality. It seems like just the way it is. In doing this, we're creating some space, creating some distance from the thoughts, the overt narrative that keeps the attention rolling in time. And as that calms down, we become aware of, let's say, the source of all that. Where does the thought come from? How in time does it appear in experience and then seem to disappear? So it'll calm down, and then we'll maybe notice some amorphous narratives or thought forms, kind of almost coming up into form. Like I say, you're not noticing this from a position. Coming up into form, or almost doing that, and then immediately dissolving back into this amorphous kind of moving of consciousness. There's a kind of movement quality to it and a stillness quality to it at the same time. It might go that it's not quite clear what's a thought and what's not, but it'll kind of move and then dissipate, move and dissipate, and it'll get really, really calm. This is when things can start getting weird. So there can be, for me, initially there was like a tension behind my eyes and in the head. that felt kind of yucky. It was like it was kind of like a physical withdrawal symptom from the thoughts in my head. It felt like a kind of uncomfortableness, a tension, tension. Eventually, that kind of flipped. It just clicked, and then things got much calmer. That tension just went away. Turns out the noticing of that tension was the thought. Once the noticing of that tension, the description of very subtly that I have this withdrawal symptom of thoughts in my head, once that was noticed as a thought, it just dropped. Things like this pop up, and it becomes to be access to the deeper levels of the movement of thought and how they kind of materialize into a narrative. It can start getting really strange as well. We can start having these kind of experiential side effects. So, and that can be whatever. Some people experience like a kundalini type energy, like a buzzing, shapes and colours behind the closed eyes, images appearing, stuff like that. It gets a bit wild. It's also very interesting. But when the thoughts calm down to an extent, there's no holding of a position separate from the thoughts that refers to the thoughts. That's watching mind quietness. That's not what it's like. It's kind of like, you find out for yourself, but it's kind of like, I use the word dilation a lot. It's kind of like that reference point dilates out to the point where when it's completely quiet, when the thoughts have calmed down to an extent, there's no reference position that is me central to all that can refer to it and say, this is a quiet space. It just is what it is. And it feels like an infinitely expanding space, but not space. It gets very paradoxical, and within that there's a still quality to it, but it's also simultaneously buzzing with aliveness the whole time. It's like there's a movement quality to it. It's moving. It's an amorphous, energetic, alive, like intensely alive, intimate space of awareness. And then that starts to become the most interesting thing that you've ever experienced. That starts to become, whatever that is, that's not a thing, becomes more interesting, more enticing, more captivating than the thoughts as they appear, or the narratives that the thoughts suggest. Even the thoughts as they appear from this potentiality into form and then seem to disappear or dissolve. Even that's very interesting, but from no position. This just gets easier and easier. It gets easier and easier and more enjoyable to, let's say, explore with no effort this pure awakeness. It can get quite scary as well, because we're exploring what we are, but our preconceptions about what, let's say, awareness or awakeness is, as made by the minds, don't match up to the experience or the being of this. So for me, it was quite shocking to see that, again, from no position, to see that the nature of this was buzzing, constantly buzzing with intense aliveness. There was a peace to it, and but the peace wasn't a peace nothingness. It wasn't an absence of something, but it wasn't a something either. It's hard to describe. It's very paradoxical. That's when the position, the basic position of me as I refer to or relate to experience really tries to reinstate itself, and it will try and label things about what you are experiencing, but you are not experiencing anything, not from that position anymore. The stillness, people describe it as a stillness, and for me it was a still but moving, paradoxical, alive but not in form. Peaceful but peacefully alive. I could use many contradictory, paradoxical terms to describe it, but for me that almost grew and grew. It almost became more and more engulfing. By contrast to the position that the mind would take on it, or the me would take on it, it became vast, it became overwhelming, to the point where whatever that is, that's not a thing, replaced, in a sense, replaced the primary experience of me as a person who thinks and relates to experience, who is at the centre of experience and is generally defined by thought. So I guess that I describe it as a space opening up within or behind thought that also eventually includes the thoughts as well, or the movement of thought as well. That would kind of be an okay way to describe it. But it kind of feels like there's this urgency there of noticing the thoughts and then releasing the thoughts. There becomes this kind of urgency there, this generalised urgency or generalised tendency to form a position. When that relaxes, this just becomes like you're not trying to find anything anymore, because it's clear that what you were trying to find is what you are. It becomes much more self-directed, much more self-confirming, much less of a looking for something, and much more of an embodying of what is already. If that makes sense. But it all begins by looking for, seemingly initially from a position, looking for or noticing of thought. And when I said that I noticed that the me that I thought I was merely suggested in the context of thought and the movement that formed thought, it's not like the noticing of that was the attainment of the awakening. It just wasn't like that. That became clear. The me became clear, let's say, as an object, as a function, but it didn't become clear from another position separate from it. It was almost in and through and behind it, and then that came up and kind of took over experience. That became the primary experience, the self-confirming, self-evident experience. It didn't need to be confirmed by discovering this or discounting that. It was just there anyway. It just came through as it and always was anyway, and it felt like still moving but buzzing with aliveness. Infinite, not in the way that the mind would frame it, in space. Infinite in an intimate way that transcended space, but also felt vast. I described it before as as a expansive yet contained quality. It wasn't, with the mind will frame something as, or my mind framed it as an expansive thing that was big in space, that was infinite in space. It wasn't really like that. And it also framed this stillness, this quietness as a nothing with no content. It's not like that either. I can't describe what it's like, but it becomes so obvious that no descriptions are needed, no position is needed, because it's just inherent anyway in reality. That's just the way it is. And it's like when I say this is doubtless, it doesn't require confirmation, it doesn't require doubt, it doesn't require either one, it just is. And that's what, when that's tasted, when that is clear, when that is clear, when that is experienced and embodied, that's all you need. The rest of this is just in and as that infinitely, and it deepens itself. It deepens itself. But I think it's important to point that out, because when we begin this, the mind frames it in a certain way. Like I am watching thought, but you're watching thought from a thought, from an assumption of me. This is why it's hard to explain, because it's quite paradoxical. But all you need to do is notice. It's just a noticing, an attentive noticing, and just keep doing that. Just keep doing that. There does seem to be a bit of an effort involved at the start, where it feels like effort. It feels like you're doing something. You are, through effort and noticing, or through effort being attentive or directing attention, something like that. But eventually, as all that thought stuff just kind of diminishes, as that kind of dies down, it's revealed that that was never what was happening anyway. That was a framing of thought. That was a framing of the character doing something. The important part is getting in touch with that, which I described as awakeness, aliveness, or awareness, stillness, presence. Getting in touch with that and then disappearing into that, essentially. Just relaxing into that, dilating into that. Notice as you do that, noticing it and letting go any thought form that appears. And the thought forms that you weren't aware of as thoughts will start to become apparent. And that's my stomach, must be hungry. And it will start to it won't even feel like a definite this or a definite that. Like, this is a thought, that's a thought. It won't have that definition to it. It'll be much more subtle, much more intuitive, much less harder to take a position on. And with that position softens and eventually just disappears. And then we just start noticing this that I described, this in the senses. And when we are fully invested and fully engaged, immersed in the senses without that mind position distraction, then we can really start seeing, really start hearing, really start feeling. And then we naturally just notice things about this experience of form in the world that we just never bothered to notice before. That all it took was to just look without interpretation, or to just experience without interpretation. And then something obvious becomes apparent, but it's obvious in a completely different way, not in the way that the mind would consider things to be obvious. And this just goes infinitely deep, and it's just infinitely fascinating and complete, peaceful and made of enlightenment, made of love itself, and it never gets boring. It's constantly waking up. It's constantly that experience of that amazing experience of recognition, awakeness, recognizing itself infinitely in form all the time. It just gets more and more simple, less and less complicated by thought, more and more simple. Anyway, that'll do for now, and I'll talk to you next time.